Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks To interview, where my guest today is Rachel Beanland, author of Florence Adler Swims Forever. I'm a very avid swimmer, as everyone knows, and I usually do a lot of swimming in the pool, and I just want you to know that this book was read poolside this weekend, and then also while floating in the pool, because I want to have the complete experience of thinking about swimming the entire time I was reading this book. If it was on audio, I would have kept going and just kept swimming, listening to it. I love this book. It's a Book Reporter Bets On selection, and I'm going to be talking to you for so many reasons why I love this book. So welcome, Rachel. I am so looking forward to speaking with you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with you telling us about this book and why I am just so crazy about it. So go ahead.
Well, the book takes us to 1934 Atlantic City in the summer. And we have the title character, Florence Adler, who has returned from college intent on swimming the English Channel by summer's end. And of course, things do not go as planned. Florence drowns very, very early in the book. I'm not giving anything away with that. And so the story actually becomes a story about what happens to her family in the months after she has died. Her sister, Fanny, is 7 years older than her, and she's in the hospital on bed rest. She has lost a baby the summer before and is in the midst of another dangerous pregnancy. And the family makes the decision, and in particular, the girl's mother, Esther, makes the decision not to tell Fanny that Florence has died. And this, of course, takes great strength on the part of Esther. And there's lots of room for many people in the family to kind of question whether it is or isn't the right thing to do.
And this is based on something that actually happened in your family, which this was the part that I was completely intrigued when I read when I read your after notes of this actually happened.
Yeah. So Gussie, the child in the book, she's 7 years old. She is inspired by my grandmother. My grandmother's name was Frances, and like Gussie, she grew up in Atlantic City. Both, everyone in her family was from Atlantic City, and one of her earliest memories was watching her Aunt Florence's body be brought back up onto the beach after drowning in much the same way I describe in the book. The real Florence Lowenthal was her name. She was a champion swimmer. And it was her dream to swim the English Channel. My grandmother that summer, she was staying with her grandparents, not her grandfather was actually deceased at that point. She was staying with her grandmother. And, her mother was in the hospital on bed rest. And so when I was a kid, and I don't remember a time in which I didn't know this story, but it was definitely a story that was passed down. And, of course, I think anytime a family has a drowning in the family or any kind of a sudden death of a young person, that story can kind of stay with a family for many generations. But in this case, I think the story stayed with us for many reasons, one of which was the tragedy surrounding Florence's death. But another was that, Florence's mother had made this very kind of strong-willed decision to keep the news from her daughter in the hospital. And in my family, the women in my family held that decision up as like, if you love someone, this is what you do for them. Like, no question. There was never any question that this would be my great-great-grandmother did the right thing by keeping it from her surviving daughter. And I remember even as a little girl questioning that and just thinking, I don't know. I just don't know. And thinking, well, gosh, I could so easily put myself in the position of this would be my great grandmother in the hospital bed and just kind of wonder, well, what if she had wanted to know and I think maybe part of it as I've gotten older I've known a number of people who, you know, close to me who have died. And I do think about this idea of kind of mourning people in real time. Like it is a distinct feeling to mourn someone weeks or months after they've died. Like that is a different type of
Yes.
feeling. And so, you know, I just thought, even as a kid, I thought, wow, they really did take something kind of large away from her.
Hmm.
And in my family, it was always presented as 100% this was the right thing to do. Like, so when I disagreed with that as a, you know, as a young person, and then, you know, as I became a mother and, you know, I still questioned it. I thought, well, that's probably the makings of a good novel. It felt like a good novel. So, you know, of course I created a whole fictional family and lots of other secrets. I was really interested in this idea, not just of secret keeping, but of keeping secrets for other people's benefit. You know, the times when we decide that we would like to play God and figure out what, you know, what people do get to know about their own lives. So.
What they need to know and what they don't. So was this percolating with, as you know, I need to write this as a story for a long time before you started writing it? Or was it just a story in the family?
You know, I mean, I've always been a big reader and a big writer. I didn't think, when I was very young, I didn't necessarily think, oh, I have to grow up to be a novelist, because I just didn't even see that as a potential job you could have. Lucky that it is one, but it didn't occur to me. But it's funny what we pick up on when we're young and when we're interested in certain stories, or, you know, a couple of years ago, we went back to Atlantic City to scatter my grandparents' ashes. They had both died. And so all the cousins were together. And I was, at that point, I'm trying to remember if I had sold the book, or I don't think I had sold it, but I maybe was close to getting an agent or something. You know, it was seeming like it was going to be a real book. And I was talking to a cousin of mine who's also a writer. And he was interested in what I was working on, and I was describing it. And, you know, I said, oh, you know, based off the family story about Florence's death. And he was like, what? I'm like, yeah. And I sat down, we were eating dinner. I said, let me tell you you know, this is the story my mother told me 100,000 times. He's like, my father never told me that story. And so, but my guess is probably at some point that story did come up when he was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, it wasn't something that rang any bells for him, or, you know, it just like wasn't one he was particularly tuned into. Whereas for me, in whatever the context was, my mother first told me the story, it became a story I was so interested in that I continuously asked about it, you know? So by the time like my grandmother died and, you know, I was in the midst of writing this novel, I mean, I had talked about the story, asked about the story a dozen times. I mean, you know, it was just something I was always intrigued by. So I think that from that standpoint, while I couldn't have told you at 16, I'm going to write a novel about this, I definitely thought, oh, this is an interesting story. So.
And it is completely interesting. And, you know, Florence, we know she dies. She dies in the first 14 pages of the book. I went back and looked and I said, I knew she died early. And I'm like, wait a second. I was on page 14 and this had already happened. But in these few pages before we meet her, we get to know her. You've drawn such a strong picture of her. I see her personality. I saw her moving around. I saw her as this real person with gumption that's been presented in a very short sliver of time. Before everybody reflects back on her, I saw her, and I think that's a real gift to have been able to do that in a very, you know, compressed point. And then I said, wait a second. I went back and looked today. I said, by page 14, she was gone. But I feel like I knew her so well. So was that like determined at the beginning, like we weren't going to see her, she was home, this, like a lot happened, like we're immediately plunged into the story of the tragedy of her and then how it happens to everybody else. Was the book always like that, or is there always more of her up front?
Well, you know, it's a tricky thing, right? I always knew I was writing a novel about the period of time after someone's death. And that was what was important to the story. So I really struggled initially when I was playing around with the beginning with how much of Florence to show, to readers. For me, I wanted to give enough of her that people could come to love her, and that they could kind of have some inkling of what all of these family members had lost. Because one of the things that I was very interested in was the different ways that we all grieve, and it never looks the same even among the same people in one family who are all grieving the same person. And so I knew that I needed to show enough of her that you could come to love her. I still think part of the way you come to love her is by continuing to reflect on memories that other people have of her throughout the book. But I did want people to connect with her. And in the end, I played with a couple of different things. I mean, I played with giving her a prologue that was from her perspective. I played with kind of like the idea, I'd never got as far as writing these, but like I played with the idea of interspersing like her perspective throughout and some sort of flashbacks. And I was pretty committed to just moving forward in time throughout the summer. So it just that all kind of started to feel artificial. I was in a writing workshop at the time that I began the novel. I got my MFA from Virginia Commonwealth University, and I was taking a novel writing workshop with Tom DeHaven. And in the workshop, one of the earliest things I brought to them was a prologue from Florence's perspective. And many of the people in the workshop said something very similar along the lines of, this is great, but just get us into the story. And we will, if you intersperse these kind of memories of her, we will come to love her. And so that's what I ended up doing, is kind of giving you as brief a sliver of her as I could get away with in the beginning, and then making sure that there are plenty of like rich opportunities throughout the book for you to connect with her. And I think it worked. I was pleased with the way that it turned out. Of course, there is always this pressure in the beginning of a novel to pick things up fast, like get people really in there. And it's of course always a challenge, but
I was right there. But it's funny because I didn't realize it was that quick till I went back and I was preparing questions today. I was like, wait a second, this is page 14. It's even brisker than I thought it was when I was originally reading. And I said, that's a real art to have gotten me that involved, that I was going to mourn this character and I was going to want to see this right by page 14. So, kudos to you.
Well, thank you. And I mean, I really do think it's partly, part of it's a testament to what kind of person I think the real Florence must have been. I mean, I don't know much about her, but man, the type of woman who the real Florence Lowenthal drowned in 1929. But I mean, the type of woman who was interested in swimming the English Channel in that era. I mean, wow, I was so inspired by the story. And I did a lot of research when I was writing her character. I was reading about Trudy Adderley, who was the first woman to swim the English Channel. And I mean, these were some women with serious gumption. So I really tried to tap into that.
When you think about the Roaring 20s, you think about what the times were when she was, when she was originally doing this. It's just a different time to have that kind of a mindset of this is what I'm going to do. Did you spent time in Atlantic City scattering your grandparents' ashes. Did you spend a lot of time there researching for the story of what the place was like? Because you definitely, the place is a character in the book as well. And you see the whole city coming to life and what those big grand hotels looked like and what it was like to, get away from the Philadelphia area or down from New York or whatever and go on those beaches. Was that book research or on the ground research?
I mean, Atlantic City is a funny place because it's so different now than it was then. If it had been set in Cape May or someplace, that might have been easier to accomplish. But I really did have to go to a lot of primary sources and secondary sources as well. But much of my research took place just at home, as I was writing the book. And then I did make about a 4-day trip to Atlantic City a couple of months before actually we scattered my grandparents' ashes, but made like a 4-day trip and went to the archives and the public library and looked at all the microfilm from that summer, and, just kind of, but at that point I was more kind of filling in a few key scenes and crossing T's and dotting I's. I knew where the story was going at that point. The research for the book was really fascinating to me. I mean, I enjoyed it tremendously. I had heard stories from my grandparents about Atlantic City. No one in my family had lived in Atlantic City since the early 80s. So it wasn't a place that was familiar to me, except in my grandparents' stories. And, even by the time I was working on the novel, my grandfather had Parkinson's, and so his memory was kind of failing him. And my grandmother was still very sharp, but she was in her 90s. And so they would give me little bits and pieces, but the bulk of it I got from other places. A lot of reading. They gave me my grandparents gave me all their old travel guides from Atlantic City, and some of them dated back to the 1800s that had been passed down in their families.
Wow.
And, you can kind of see behind me, I guess this interview you won't be able to see, but I did a foam core. I printed out a giant map from the 20s, which was the closest I could get to 1934. And I put it on foam core, and then would use little pins to dot locations of things. And I would use the old city directories, which you can find online, to figure out, okay, there was a diner on this corner. And, so I really had a very good sense of how they would have maneuvered around Atlantic City. In the case of, for instance, the Adlers' storefront in their apartment, that is on the location of my family's old, my family ran like a jewelry store on that same corner. So there were some places I was able to borrow from the past a little, but one of the books that was the most helpful was this funny book. I mean, it's funny just because I don't think it had a wide circulation. It's a very narrow interest. It was like Jewish businesses of Atlantic City during like the era I was looking at, basically. And it had all these little vignettes where it would tell the story of a family that immigrated and what business they ran in Atlantic City. And so I just, I could find stuff all over the place. Atlantic City in particular, because it's a tourist town and was always a tourist town, you can find postcards and souvenirs, and you go to eBay and there's stuff. I mean, it's easy to find the stuff that helps you get a feel for the place.
Yeah, and you definitely felt like it was there. I mean, I felt like I was there the whole time. You also had this thing where about swimmers in distress almost always turn their bodies to face the shore. And that's what they would do. Did you spend any time as a beach guard, or where did you get that little salient point? Because it was just so interesting that that's what they would do. That's what, people would do, like trying to point home or something.
Yeah, I know. It's really kind of sad when you think about it. I was a lifeguard, I will say. I do. If you can tell, if you read the Stewart sections, like if my love of lifeguarding comes through, I did have some years as a lifeguard. I really think lifeguarding is like a tremendously amazing job for teenagers and young people. I just think it's fun.
Did you lifeguard on the beach? Did you lifeguard on the beach?
Well, I take that back. I did lifeguard on a beach partially, but it was in the Patuxent River, so it was not like ocean waves. It was much calmer. But yeah, but even something like lifeguarding, where I know a lot about it, or at one time I knew a lot about it, I still had to research it. You can't trust like what you knew of. And what's funny, if you take anything like lifeguarding or CPR or any of that, it's all changed so much between the 30s and now. I'm sure they've changed the way you do CPR just from when I was a lifeguard to now, so I still had to research everything, down to, how to make a save lifeguarding in 1934 or whatever.
And it's all the people who try to save her along the way. There are all those lifeguards there, all trying to help. And what was going on, and everyone was taking a turn before they, pronounced her. And I was just found that were really, really interesting. It was like there was a whole group there involved.
And that's real. Like that's based on the true story. And I was fascinated to learn it. But when and in fact, I can remember going back and forth with my editor and her being like, it's really confusing with how many people are in this beach tent. Like, what's going on? Why are there so many lifeguards? Like, can we just get these lifeguards out of here? And I'm like, no, they were really there. I think I like shaved it a little, so it wasn't quite so, I mean, probably in my first round, I had like lifeguards everywhere, but, when I found the old newspaper article about Florence's drowning, and, they specifically call out in it that there were 40 lifeguards who worked in that tent over the course of 2 hours to try to save her. So, I'm sure much of that time was just time spent in vain. I mean, I think at that point there wouldn't have been much to do, but yeah, so that was real. I mean, it was strange, but real.
And it was also what community was like at that point too. She was our person who was going to go swim the channel. We were all a part of her life. We all wanted to help save her. We wanted to be the one that could do it. That's what I was picking up on, that is everybody wanted to be a part of, like, who she was and bring her back, because they thought she was like their hero or heroine in a lot of ways. So now we've got secrets that are the huge part of this book, and deception. And there's many, many layers of secrets and deception. I don't think anybody doesn't have a secret and something to hide of what they're doing. Was it challenging to orchestrate those moments so that the story was moving, but it wasn't just secret, 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 secret? Did you plot it all?
Yeah, the question people always ask, like, well, do you plot novels? Or, everyone's got a different answer, I think, as a novelist. But this one, because I told the story from 7 perspectives, and because I rotated those perspectives, and particularly because I rotated them, I don't know if you picked up on this, in the same order.
I did.
I gave myself a lot of limitations in doing that. And so the only way that I could make it work was to do some outlining. And what I did was I didn't do this right away. I think when I started writing, I maybe knew what was going to happen in like the first 6 or 7 chapters. And I knew what was going to happen. I had a vague idea. But then when I realized, this is getting complicated, I started this really unsexy Excel document where I had the characters like on one, on a column, and then I had the months on, the characters were in rows on the, whatever it was, XY axis. Math was not my strong suit.
There's a reason you have the MFA.
This is why I have my MFA. I had characters on one side and I had months on the other. And so what I had to make sure to do was like, the time between like when you see Fanny in July and when you see Anna, I mean, maybe is 3 weeks or something. So I couldn't just afford to get to Anna and realize, oh crap, I needed to have some interaction between whoever and whoever. So the Excel document kind of kept me straight, because I could dip in and say, all right, I'm not in Isaac's chapter, but I need to advance his storyline, and so that did kind of keep me honest. And I was able to kind of make sure that for each character, regardless of whether it was their chapter, I knew I was carrying through their threads. I think that was the big thing, was just I didn't want to lose a thread.
And it's not like you jumped around. It's a very linear story in a lot of ways, with 7 different characters, that a lot is happening also over a short 3-month period. And I, get to a section, it's July, it's August, this is what's moving along and what's happening. It was, I thought that was challenging, but by the same token, it completely worked. It was a very smooth read. And some books are not smooth. Sometimes you can sit there and go, that was an edit, or that was a drop in, or that was a move around or something. And I didn't feel that way when I was reading the story. I felt like I was at the beach with them spending the summer that was compressed in 2 afternoons in the pool. But other than that, I felt like I was there of, oh, it's a cloudy day, it's this or that. And they're not going to be on the lifeguard stand. I knew what that would feel like. And somebody going to be late at night and you were going to miss what you were doing. You had all those moments in that would throw things, but it wasn't like I felt like I was jumping around. It was like, oh yeah, that would happen. Oh yeah, that would happen.
Yeah.
These secrets. I felt like the one thing they could do is they could keep a secret in that time frame, because I did like the way she told everybody what to do. Funeral homes not to say anything, the papers not to say anything, hospitals not to say anything, everybody's not to say anything. And I'm thinking about now, where you couldn't do anything without it being on your town Facebook page, somebody taking a picture on Instagram. But there's no hiding the way you would be able to do it at that point. Nobody would want to keep the secret. Everybody want to tell the secret,
Well, what's funny is like, I didn't really set out to write historical fiction. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I've been dying to write something set in the past. But I wanted to tell this story, and I knew like pretty quickly that there was no way you could take the story and set it in the present day. Like, you couldn't even set it in the 80s probably, I mean, it just like wasn't a secret that people could have kept then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is the technology just hadn't caught up enough, but I think the other part is just that, I don't know about you, but like certainly my grandparents and definitely a generation beyond my grandparents, they were tight-lipped and tight-lipped in a way that we are not now, and so that kind of confessional thing we all do now, it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. So
it's family business. It was family business, and the family business stayed within the family. And that could be your house, or sometimes it was extended family members, but most of it was your family business. It was whoever it was living in your house. It wasn't even, and we don't share that. That's not news to go share. And people are right now share everything about their children. They share everything all day long. And you're just there like, wait, I wonder if these kids really want this much to be known about them. It's
right. Yeah.
It's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Well, you couldn't get away with anything right now. I mean, it's
no.
Something everybody announces it,
Yeah, you would have a really hard time now. It would have, it would have definitely not felt believable. So yeah, I had to set it in the past, and here we are.
Yeah, exactly. Guilt also plays a big part. Isaac feels guilty about what happened before Fanny had the baby the year before. Joseph feels guilty about things. Esther feels guilty about things. There's such a huge level of everyone, as much as they have secrets as a family, they have secrets unto themselves as well. And those are propelling the story as well, because nobody wants those little tidbits to be known. They don't want those things to be known. So as a result, they're parceling out what you hear besides being the big secret. There's a lot of other things going on as well, and how they find them, because it's like you're in a drawer, you're in a closet, you're here, there, the other place, and you're doing it. And I just felt that those little pieces and fragments, just work so very, very well, because it was laying those out.
I really did try to think long and hard about making sure every character had a secret or just kind of a problem that they were as committed to seeing through or to protecting someone from as they were committed to the big overarching secret. And of course, with the big overarching secret, some people are less committed to it than others. And so that also gives tension to the book.
Yeah, what's going on? You also portrayed the Jewish burial rituals against the backdrop of what's going on in the summer town. Now, years ago, I was raised Roman Catholic. So I was going to a friend and they were sitting Shiva at their house, and I had not gone to Shiva. So I went and did all this reading up on what happens at Shiva. And they said, they'll be wearing torn clothes, they'll be sitting on low chairs, the mirrors will be covered. And I didn't realize my friends were Reformed. And we went into the house and I was like looking for her ripped clothes and I was looking for the mirrors and she goes, no, we don't do that. And it was just so interesting. But the part I really missed was when they all went for the walk on the boardwalk together, that was how they broke Shiva. And that was one of the traditions I didn't see, I've never read about before. And it was so interesting because people just joined the group like as they were walking.
Yeah.
But it was something I just didn't know anything about.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not as observant as this family is. That was one area where I did have to do my research as well to try to recapture, the level of Judaism that my family would have been, honoring kind of in that time period. But I do love the idea of that walk. I mean, I think it's a really nice, one of the things that somebody asked me, could this family, could I have done this with a family that was not Jewish? And of course, the answer is yes. Like plenty of families have their own grieving rituals and their own forms of mourning that would have also worked with this scenario. But I do think that there is something about the Jewish mourning rituals that are kind of lovely for this story because a lot of them are very community based. And what the family is doing when they keep Florence's death a secret is they are denying themselves their own community, and the solace that they could get from their community. And really even the solace they could get from each other in many cases. So I think that there's this nice denial that happens with their kind of abbreviated / I don't know what you want to say, the way that they kind of both do and don't honor Shiva, that works for what's happening.
Yeah. It's very insular, but by the same token, you feel like that's where they needed to be as a family. That's where they needed to come together. That's what they needed to do. And I feel that very, very strongly because they all needed to be together because they weren't going to let anyone else in. And it's also very much like the time right now, whereas if something happens, there is no gathering of everybody. It's the immediate family and that's it.
I predicted that, but it turns
out. Who knew? People would know exactly how this feels. You've also, I've done a lot of reading and you wrote how your dad's death influenced your writing about grief. And you're writing about it from a very, deep place and you can tell. And was that something that you started writing at that point or had you always been like writing and being able to take on a topic like this? Had you always been a writer?
I had always written something. Like I was always writing something. But after my dad died, I got much more serious. My dad was really fun. At one point I was blogging and I was, I was always in PR. So I was always doing like little things and then occasionally I'd do a creative writing workshop and I was just kind of all over the place in my 20s. And at one point my dad sat me down. This is before he got sick. He was just being an opinionated jerk, and he said, like, you're wasting your time with all this stuff. What you need to be doing is writing a novel. And it was such a sweet thing to say because it was like he clearly believed in me so much. And at the time I was like, oh, Dad, like your fathers are just always the worst. But I thought about that so much after he died, that he had been this really staunch believer in me and my work and that, he didn't want to see me wasting my time. And after I was 29 when he died, he was 58. He died of pancreatic cancer. And I definitely think that his death, it did a few things for me. One was I just saw how young you can be when you die. My dad had big plans for retirement and, always kind of thought there would be another chapter and there just wasn't. And so part of what his death did for me was just show me, I don't know how much time I have and there's no reason that I should be waiting to do the things I want to do. So that was part of it. And then, his death also did really allow me to kind of think about grief. I read a ton after he died, grief memoirs and just books by super wise people who, you know, have kind of traveled that road. And so after he died, I did start to write, and initially in a more serious way. Like I was waking up every day and writing for a couple of hours before I woke my kids and, you know, got everyone up for school and work and stuff. And I started to kind of amass this like collection of stories about him. And I don't know, just one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I was really engaged in like a strong writing practice where it was something I was doing every day, come hell or high water. It was something that just made me feel good. And, you know, and when you lose someone, if you can find something that makes you feel good, like,
oh, good, you're going to do it. You're going to do it.
And, so that was a really nice, easy transition into, you know, I'd been working on, a lot of kind of essays and just other nonfiction. And then around, you know, it was maybe 5 years after that I said, okay, it's time. I'm going to write the novel.
Yeah. It's almost like you had to work through these phases. Like, okay, I'm sitting down to write. Writing is now part of my life. And it does make you feel good, like exercise. It's like really crazy. It gives that same kind of endorphin thing. And people like don't understand it. I mean, I write a weekly newsletter. There are certain things you do, a feeling of accomplishment when it's done. And it's like, wait, I've got this piece out. I've got this piece done. There's something really wonderful about it.
Yeah. Do you ever find that like sometimes if I exercise too much, I don't like writing as much, or like it ruins my writing? And I'm like, oh, I got to step back on this exercise thing.
Believe me, I could step back from exercising anytime.
I know. Like, oh, don't want to go too strong on the exercising. It might mess up my writing.
You know what's really funny is I'm a big on multitasking. So if I'm in the pool, I want to be listening to something, or I've got to be doing something, because just the art of just swimming is not going to just do it. And when you're writing, it's like, I usually can't even have music in the background. I can't do anything. It's one of the few things I only sit and write. Whereas most of my time I'm doing, my staff will tell you, more than one thing. Like at any given time, it's like, well, let's plan this and do that, the other thing. Writing, you go into a zone and you have to drop in that zone. And you could do early morning. I do late at night. I do when everything else is done. I can drop into, and I could do like working on a project or something till 2, 3 in the morning. No problem. But early in the morning ain't going to happen. You know?
I wish. No, my brain is like applesauce after like 8 o'clock at night. I just, ugh. But yeah, whatever your time is, you just have to find it. Like,
you just got to find it and you've got to do it. But you know, you've got there are other pieces in this story as well. The Dion Quintuplets are in the story, and there are these babies, and Gussie's cutting pictures of this collage of these, and you realize that these children at this point were celebrities in their own right. And so you've got that little, you know, twist in there about like, you know, these children, and we're waiting for the baby, and we're watching these babies all grow. What made you decide to, like, you know, draw them in?
I gotta say, that was a complete gift, Carol. That was like, I knew, so Florence Lowenthal really drowned in 1929.
Right.
And there were a couple of reasons that I moved it to 1934. One was I didn't want to deal with the stock market crash, and you know, like I didn't want it to become like an economics novel. And at the time I wasn't sure like if I would maybe extend into the high holy days of that. You know, I just was like, we're getting too close. And then the other thing was that I wanted to bring in Anna and the rise of Nazism, and so it just made sense to go into the early 30s. But so I had already decided on 1934, and I was pretty locked into 1934 at that point. I'd done a lot of research and, you know, whatever. And when I figured out that those Dion quintuplets had been born that summer, it was like the biggest research gift that was ever dropped in my lap. Because you've got Fanny, who is in a hospital bed, can't go anywhere, can't do anything. Like she's very, you know, and she's the one who doesn't know the secret. So like she doesn't have a lot of agency. She's the one character who really is not in charge of her own life, right? Well, I guess you could make the case that Gussie's not in charge of her own life either. But yeah, so she didn't have much agency. I needed her to have reasons to get up in the morning and people to talk to, and, you know, just a whole kind of like life for herself in this hospital bed. And so when I figured out that the Dion quintuplets had been born like literally as she was checking into the hospital.
Right.
I was so thrilled. Because for those listening who do not know about the Dion Quintuplets, they were a Canadian set of quintuplets who were born to a family, a husband and wife, who already had 5 or 6 children at home.
Yeah.
They already had a lot of kids at home. And this was a completely, of course, it was before IVF. It was a completely natural case of quintuplets. And what is miraculous, they were all girls and they all lived. And it was the first case of quintuplets who had lived ever. So the whole world was watching these girls. And their story is actually quite sad as they get on in years. They became a bit of a freak show, and the Canadian government made a lot of money on them, and I think there were a lot of there are some interesting books on them, and if you're interested, there are plenty of articles and other things you can find. But so I think their life didn't really go very well in many regards, but that summer in 34, it wasn't a stretch to say that America was obsessed with these little girls. And I thought, well, of course, Fanny is pregnant. She's on bed rest. She's lost a baby. She would be so resentful of this woman in Canada who has 5 healthy babies after already having 6 at home. It just was perfect. So that was a real gift.
And her daughter's obsession with them as well. It's like, here's the pictures of the babies. And she does, and I'm not going to give away, but she puts a collage in, and she's got some baby that no one would want in the collage, and they're trying to cover it up.
Yeah.
It's just priceless of what was going on. I did not also realize that things in Germany were happening in 1934. I thought 36 or, late 35. I didn't realize that things were happening and things were that bad in 1934. And, my mother-in-law has told stories because her family was here. Her father and mother were here. They had their 2 children here. And then they went back to Germany because her father really wanted to go back. He wasn't finding, a good life here. And they were there, and then they sensed there was a problem, and they left. And we were finding the manifests of, and I can't remember what year it was, but we found the manifests of them, and her little brother didn't have a passport. He was like on hers, like, coming back at that point. It was like, we need to leave, and we need to leave now because this is just not going to go well.
Yeah.
So they were German and they came back here, but I didn't realize 34. And when I was realizing that, you had to be sponsored, all these things, I just thought it had happened later. And I thought that was such an interesting slice of history as well. Book.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the things that makes, there are so many things that make the Holocaust completely tragic, but one of the things that is so heartbreaking is that we saw the writing on the wall for a really long time. And the United States government, I was living under the perception that the reason that Jews had such a hard time getting out was because of the German government. And it was really only as I did a lot of research that I realized, no. The problem in those early days, now later it changed, but in those early days, the problem was the American government. We were creating all kinds of hoops that people had to jump through, and making it increasingly more difficult every time someone turned around. And I think at one point I allude to the 25 documents or the 50 documents that is not an exaggeration. I was reading books that were just, step by step, like these are how what they had to do to try to immigrate. And it was so extensive what was required of them. And even when they did it perfectly, it didn't always work. So, I of course was thinking about, the immigration issues that face our country today when I was writing this. And I never want to lose sight of that we could have as a country done so much more, to help, Jews leave Europe. And, we made conscious bureaucratic decisions not to do it.
Yeah. And I just didn't realize the timing. I didn't realize, any of that. And I think that had me wanting to go read more. it had me wanting to go read more and, you know, just learn more as well. Also, at one point, Anna's visiting the hospital and she's reading Tender as the Night to Fanny. And what made you pick that as the book that they were reading to each other? Was there a specific reason?
So I quote the beginning of it in the book, and it's literally like Atlantic City is like layered on top of it. It's really perfect. It came out that year. It was a new release that year. I think I also should give a little credit to my professor with that one, because the professor that was helping me on the novel writing workshop, at that point, it's much later in the book and I was no longer in his workshop, but for some reason I remember, I think I reached out to him and said, hey, what would be a good book? You know, what are some books I should look at? I mean, I of course could Google and figure out like these were the releases in 1934, but then when I did figure it out, it was like, yes, of course.
That's the book. That's the book I've got to do.
Yeah.
That's what's going to do. So there's 7 characters in the book. Was there one that was the easiest character for you to write? The one that you just dropped in and said, oh, this is easy.
Yeah. For me, that is Gussie. Like Gussie.
I guess that. Okay.
Yeah. She was just a joy to write. I don't know if it was because I was like communing with my grandmother, through the writing of Gussie, or if it's because I have a daughter who is pretty precocious, and I have 2 daughters. And in fact, one of them is now 7 years old. But when I started writing the book, my older daughter, Clementine, was Gussie's age, or just about Gussie's age. And she's extremely precocious and always has been. So she was probably a little bit of my inspiration. Mm-hmm. But I was definitely in the trenches of motherhood when I was writing Gussie. And so that made her easy for me to kind of dig into. And you know, what I sometimes tell people, and I think it's really true with Gussie, is that a lot of writers steer away from writing children because they think that adults don't want to read them, that they're hard, they can be hard to connect with, because their brains aren't fully formed. Yeah. They're not operating at an adult level, and we like it when people do that. But I do think that the joy of a child in literature can be that they can sometimes see the world more clearly than we do, or they process it more clearly. They say what they actually think as opposed to what they think people want to hear them say. And so I do think that Gussie has this really lovely way of, just through small gestures, and it's not always even what she says, but what she does, that let you as the reader know, oh, I don't like this guy, or I don't, or yes, this woman's here for the right. It's easy for me to use her as kind of a mirror back at the other characters. And I think that that's one of the things that she's really great for.
I loved when she went to the hospital. I just loved when she was in the hospital, because you realize if you're the grandmother, the entire time you're there, you have your heart in your throat about what she's going to say or do. And the end of that scene, I'm not going to spoil it, when they just yank her out of the room. You can just picture, and now we're leaving, we're gone. You know what I mean?
Right.
You can just picture what that scenario was like. And the mother's like, oh my gosh, I just aged 10 years bringing this child to this one room,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No. She was a hoot to write. So I liked her a lot.
And I'm going to guess Isaac was the most challenging, or who was the most challenging?
Poor Isaac. I think I would say Fanny was my most challenging, because of the fact that she was so physically limited. We are taught that we need to keep our characters in motion. Mm-hmm. And because she was physically in a hospital bed, I had to find ways for motion to find her. And so that was challenging. And I kind of had to create a whole different world for her in the hospital. Mm-hmm. Than everyone else, everyone else was kind of orbiting in their own world. And then I had Fanny's world. But Isaac was not that challenging for me. And, people have a lot of opinions about Isaac, and I don't want to give a lot away. But I'll just say that for me with Isaac, what was important to do was help readers understand where he was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the reasons he gets more backstory than most of the other characters. And I just really, I was interested in the reasons that he might make the decisions he does. And I think that, like most of us, when we make bad decisions, there are reasons, you know, and so I'm not one to write him off so entirely.
Mm-hmm. No, I could see that. I could absolutely see that. So was Florence Adler Swims Forever always the title? Was that?
Yeah,
like
it was. Yeah, I signed with my agent and it was called Florence Adler Swims Forever. And he was like, don't change the title. And I was like, okay. And then we went and sold it, and everyone, you know, when he was shopping it around, everyone was like, love the title, love the title. And when I sold it, I was like, you know, Chad, are they going to change the title? And he was like, no one's changing that title. It's great.
I love it. I love it. And I love the period picture that's here now. Was that always the cover? Or when did you see a lot of different options? Because it's just, when you read the book, it's just the most perfect cover, because it's got the time and the place.
Versions of it didn't change much. Versions of it were always floating around with this. They hired a wonderful artist who I adore, Lisa Golightly. I don't know if she's got an Instagram account and you can kind of follow her there, but she does these beach scenes that are very photographic, I think you would say. And if you look at some of her other work, it's even more photographic than the one that we have on the cover there. But they just almost, it's like you're looking at a painting, but it feels like you're looking at an old family photograph. And so she was a perfect pick, and they worked with her to get it just so. And yeah, I'm super happy with, I mean, the red bathing cap was of course real, you know. And then my mother and I went back and forth. My mom was like, she would never have worn a red bathing suit. And I'm like, Mom, it's a detail. We're gonna just work with it.
It has to be on the cover. If we want it to stand out on the cover, everyone else is in black. Everyone else is wearing these different colors.
Right. So
it really just works. It works with the title, your name, like just everything just works.
Thank you. Well, our department was great to work with at Simon & Schuster, and they did a great job.
Yeah, it tells a story unto itself. It really does. Speaking of which, this is a terrific book club pick, and you're the Barnes & Noble Book Club selection for July. How long ago did you find out that news? Long time?
I found out in March.
So you had to keep a big secret.
I have been sitting on a big secret, and it has been so painful to sit on it.
A secret during a pandemic.
A secret. Really? I know. We're so good at this in my family.
Who can I tell? Oh, they won't be going anywhere. It's not a problem. No.
And that did probably make it easier, frankly.
Really?
It's like, oh, big secret. I'm to sit in my house for 4 months. Okay.
Myself. Well, you know, I just felt when I was reading it before, like, you know, just knowing that news makes it even more special, but it's a perfect book club book. And I know that there's a way on your website for your readers to be able to sign up and talk to you about the book. But I just think it's a perfect one for talking about guilt, secrets, family, traditions, just the Holocaust, you know, leading up to the Holocaust, just every little detail of what's going on. Atlantic City, vacation towns, family. Okay, in case you're not convinced to be reading this book, let me see if I can go further. But for book clubs, I just think there's so much to discuss, no matter what age you are. Because I think that a lot of times they say, oh, this is like, you know, for older people or whatever. No, because there's such a sense of who she is, because she was this young woman. And just to give a real good sense of the time as well. So that's my pitch for book clubs. You know?
Thank you.
Anything to add?
There's a ton to discuss. And, you know, I haven't done many in-person events because of course, COVID, but I had done a few in-person events that were like part of a pre-publication tour right as COVID was hitting.
Yes.
And so at the couple of events I did do for Simon & Schuster back in early March, people were coming up to me and they all wanted to tell me their family secret.
Right.
You know, and so I just envision like, and I was kind of excited about the idea of doing a lot of in-person events because I was like, oh my God, I can only imagine the amount of family secrets I'm going to know that no one else will know because I'm a safe person to tell. I don't even know who these people are, you know, but they all wanted, it was like they wanted to get it off their chest. Like, let me tell you the thing we didn't tell anybody, you know? So I feel like book clubs are going to be like really fun with this, where everyone's gonna be like, let me tell you the thing that my grandmother went to her grave with.
Right.
So anyway,
Really big story.
People have to keep me updated on that.
Yeah, no, I want to hear from you. I want to hear like something. We've got to connect again because I'm just telling book clubs now. There's times where it's like a perfect book club book, and this is definitely a perfect book club book because it's not just about a discussion of, you know, her death, the topic, blah blah blah, history or whatever. It's just really like, it's so real to life of what family is like and what family is like hiding things. So, well, I'm also hoping that you're working on something now. Can you tell me that you are? Like, lie to me?
I am working on something now. I am. Yes. I can't tell you very much about it, but I can tell you I'm working on something.
That's all I need to know. I don't need to know.
Okay. I promise.
I don't need to know any more of the secret. I always say to authors, you don't need to tell me. Just tell me that you're doing something. Because
this will not be the last novel that I write.
That's very good. And I hope it's very soon. I talked to an author last week and she took 10 years to write the first one. I go, can we speed it up for the second? You know, can we get that moving along? So it's such a pleasure to talk to you. I wish you so much success with this book because I just think it's the kind of read we also want right now because there's that. It's not taking place in present day. It's taking place another time when things were not so great for a family over a summer. And the country was getting ready to not have some great times going on. And we already saw that through this woman, Anne, and we already saw what she was going to be going through. So like, there's this moment where we're capturing time in a very, very special place. But by the same token, family means a lot. And you can see, even during these times, what are people saying is, I want to hug my kids. I want to spend time with my grandkids. I want us all to be able to get together. And that's what you're seeing a lot of in this family, of the togetherness of this family during this really tough time. So
thank you. You've done such a like close, wonderful read of the book, and I just really appreciate it.
I loved it. So I wish you much, much success. Thank you so much for joining us. And I know I literally finished this book on, you know, Sunday. Monday booked this and now it's Tuesday. So like, folks, we really pulled this one together quickly. I was like, I don't have an interview for this week. Yes, I do. I have the absolute perfect one. So I'm glad the book was, talk about the book being in the right place at the right time.
I love it.
Thanks so much for joining us. And to everyone, look forward to seeing you next time.